And this is something that all of our subspecialty advisors are really interested in. So I jumped on the opportunity to have Jenny come talk to us about that. I'm not going to go into all of your accolades, Jenny. Thank you for your contributions, but I want to jump into to your talk. So yes. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shanta, for the introduction and for inviting me to speak on this topic. I'm excited to share this with you. So here I'm going to share my screen. So I want to just start off with some disclosures. I don't have any conflicts of interest, that we don't have to worry about that. But I was going to just preface by saying that I am a pediatrician, and as Shanta said, I've done quite a bit of the career advising for pediatrics in the last 12 years that I've been here. And so most of my work and knowledge is in the pediatric realm. I did my best to make this as broad as possible, though. I also couldn't resist, after picking the title, about including some Looney Tunes in here. And so I apologize to the adult doctors in the room. I couldn't resist. So there's going to be a little bit of a Peds feel to the talk as well. And then I also just was reflecting on the fact that most people, when they give grand rounds, it's on something that they've spent a substantial amount of their career working on or thinking about or studying. And yes, I have been involved with career advising for a number of years, both here as well as involved nationally. What I'm talking about today, I have to admit, I'm not an expert in, nor is anyone else. So I'm going to do my best. I've done as much background as I can. I'm part of a task force, again, within pediatrics that is a combined group of program directors and career advisors and clerkship directors. And so I've participated in that for the last year, talking about all these different topics, and attended all of the AAMC webinars that were offered. I presented at one of the webinars. And then I also am going to be the Peds representative to the AAMC on this whole topic of the supplemental application as it rolls out and as we assess how it all goes. But did want to just put that caveat out there that it's not like I have many of the answers. And I realized that since this was done in some groups as a pilot last year, there might be people even here who have more experience than I do because they lived through it last year. So people who know me know that I'm quite flexible and low key. So I really am hoping to have this be more of me sharing information that I know, but then also hoping to have more of a discussion and maybe brainstorm some answers to the questions that remain, because there are a lot of them. The other thing that I was reflecting on, and this was, I don't know, when I was putting this together, just reflecting on the fact that I'm talking about a topic that I have not really, don't have the amount of expertise, but it's just interesting because we've just had our CCC for our room fellows, and we rate people on ambiguity. And then the EPAC project that Shanta talked about, we were on the ground level. We were the first people, some of the first people who actually saw the intramural professional activities. And we just dove right in. So I guess I must be okay in both my clinical world and my education world to deal with ambiguity, because in rheumatology, I pretty much every day am saying things like, I have no idea, but we'll give it a try. And then it was interesting, I found this article on dealing with stress and uncertainty, and from the American Psychological Society, and it was reflecting, it was within the pandemic, and talking about even now people are even more dealing with the stress of the unknown. And then it was interesting because it talked about tips for how to deal with life's uncertainties. And so since this is the supplemental application is a lot of unknown, I was thinking that hopefully some of the things that we'll talk about today will prepare us to deal with that and help us be a bit less stressed and more resilient in this process. So just so you know, for the plan that I had for this hour was going to talk about why this change is being made, share the pilot data from last year's experience, and then focus more on what the plans are for this current or upcoming application cycle, and then reflect and hopefully have some discussion about next steps, what the opportunities and risks are, and then share some resources for you as you embark in however this affects you in your lives. And then just my objectives. My hope is that by the end, you'll be able to identify the benefits and the pitfalls of this supplemental application, be able to think about how students and residency programs will be able to utilize this to the fullest and avoid as many of the pitfalls as possible. So to really make that case for change, one of the things that really drove this is something that some people call as match frenzy. And so this is based on some of the data that has come out in the last several years, where they, through the AAMC, that as you can see here, that the total number of applicants outnumbers the positions for PGY1. So that puts a lot of more pressure on students and programs to figure out the appropriate matches. And the last statistic I saw was in 2019, across all specialties, there was 1.8 applicants per every PGY1 position. And it hasn't been 1 or below since 1992. So this keeps increasing. The thought is that the main reason for this is the increasing number of medical schools and increasing osteopathic graduates. International graduates has actually stayed quite level over the last many years. And then at the same time, and I guess this kind of goes hand in hand, there are a diminishing number of unfilled positions following the match. So what we used to call the scramble and now the Soep, these are the total numbers that we're seeing in 2019. And so some people who maybe were going through the process and said, oh, well, I could always go through this, I could always scramble position. That's not actually really available for most students at this point. So pediatrics, I know, looked at this in at least some groups, and this was one of the papers that came out that was talking about match frenzy and really identifying that this has put a huge burden on every aspect of the system. So students feel this pressure of having to apply to more and more programs, and then programs are incredibly overwhelmed because they're getting bombarded by all of these applicants. And that's not even accounting for the costs, the financial costs of all of that as well. So this match frenzy, kind of like the Tasmanian devil, is a good image, I thought, because it really has contributed to just this being a much, like, pretty unsustainable. And then this was just something, because I wanted to include things that were not all pediatrics. This was something from psychiatry, but just similarly, it actually represents a number of the different specialties, and just comparing and showing graphically that exponential increase in the number of residency applicants in the last decade from 2007 to 2017. And each specialty, it looks like the numbers have gone up quite a bit. It varies a little bit depending on the specialty as to how much of a jump they made, but every single one has gone up. And they called it match madness. So another cute little pun or whatever you want to call it. But yes, this is the problem. And so this is the case for change. And so residency programs are really struggling to manage the large number of applications and determining who really is interested in their program. And then students are struggling to really know, what do programs want? How many programs should they apply to? And then we're butting up against this problem with actually fewer spots at the same time. And so this was the call for a paradigm shift in this process. Additionally, I was interested to find out that the ARIS application actually has not been updated since 1996. So it's been a really long time since anyone has made edits to it. So for that reason, out came the supplemental application through the AAMC. And so I'm going to share with you the data from last year where they used a similar supplemental application that will be rolled out to this year in 3 specialties. And so last year, as you can see, it was dermatology, general surgery, and internal medicine. And their guiding principles were that they were really striving to still maintain equity and do no harm, and hopefully add value to every aspect of this equation. And then they were trying to be as evidence-based as possible. And they tried to get everyone involved that was impacted by the residency application process. And so this supplemental application was administered in September of 2021. And the participating programs, so there were 719 programs, and it spanned a wide variety. So some smaller, some larger, some academic, some community-based programs. And it looks like across the 3 specialties, anywhere from 60 to 80% of programs within that specialty participated. And so then you can see there were large numbers of students that also participated in this as well. And for those internal medicine folks, and you probably know this already, although my understanding is our program did not participate. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's true. But of the internal medicine, it did include both preliminary and categorical. And so here is the overview of what the supplemental application includes. And I did want to make sure that I did not forget that I have to give total credit for so much of this information from the AAMC. So this was my prompt to remember to say that I received permission to use their slides, but a lot of the slides are from them. And so it included 3 components and will in the upcoming year. So there's the meaningful activity or experience section, the geographic preference section, and the program signals. And so in that area, oh, and one other piece that I did want to emphasize, this was designed, most of these elements are designed to be used in the initial phases of application review and interview invites. This is not the signaling, and the preferencing is not supposed to be used later on. So I'll talk about that a bit more, but that's an important piece. And so the first part is this area for students to identify up to 5 experiences that they wanted to highlight. And it was deemed, like the way they phrased it, is just most meaningful experiences. And they gave examples and categories that students could pick from. And so that included education, teaching, work experience, volunteer work, research, things like that. And then students were allowed to write a little annotation, but it was only 300 characters for each of these meaningful experiences. There also was a section that allowed for students to identify additional impactful experiences. And the way they conceived of this was other things that may have impacted their journey up until this point. And so perhaps something related to their family background or their access to resources. And so some things that came in that some applicants could include would be if they were the first of their family to attend college, or if they worked throughout medical school to support their family, or were the primary caregiver for a family member, or things like that. So that was also in addition to the 5 meaningful experiences, and they could also elaborate briefly on that. And so as they looked at the results of the pilot, they surveyed all participants. So they surveyed the students and they surveyed the program participants, the residency program folks, and then they also surveyed career advisors. And so some of the results of the pilot, so some of the output was that applicants did report usually 4 to 5 meaningful experiences. They chose to do that. And you can see here the categories that most students chose to highlight. And then from a student perspective, 46% of the applicants thought that the little mini essays did allow them to highlight who they were to programs above and beyond what their primary application allowed them to do. And program directors, it was a little bit more mixed. They did, I think it was, about 80% of program directors and associate program directors reported that they did use this information, but they also found that there was quite a bit of overlap between what students chose to put in their ERAS application and the supplemental application. And so the program directors did not necessarily feel like it was as beneficial as it could. There were also some system issues where last year it was in a different system, and so they had to go to a separate area to look at this. And so that also contributed to some dissatisfaction on the program side. So then the second part of the supplemental application is goals for geographic preferencing. So in this case, it allows students to share if they have a geographic preference. And so again, thinking about Match Frenzy and programs getting bombarded with all of these applications, it's quite difficult to weed out or consider like how many students who are applying, let's say, to Colorado from New York really want to come to Colorado, or are they just throwing their hat in the ring because they feel like, oh, I have to apply to 40 programs. So this is a way to be able to share that you really truly do have an interest in particular areas. And then you also can specify if you have a preference between rural or urban programs. And so the elements here, so it's a little bit small. I do have the geographic areas in, it's easier to read a little bit later if you want to refer to that, but they use the Census Bureau and somehow broke up the country into 9 areas. We are in this mountain area, which is right here. And so students could select up to 3 of these 9 census divisions to basically signal that they are interested in that area. And they also could write a little 300-character or less blurb as to why they are interested in those 3 areas. Or they could say, I don't have a preference. And then they also can communicate the urban and the rural. And so this has created a lot of confusion as to how does this all work. So I have this slide. I actually have a later slide too, just to hammer it home a bit more. But so imagine that we are a program in the Pacific West. And in this first column here, the student indicates that they do have a preference for the Pacific West. So then me as the program director, I can sort to see who indicated their preference, and I will see that that student indicated a preference. If a student indicated that they picked, sadly, not our area and it's Middle Atlantic and New England, then I get no information. And then if they select, I do not have a regional preference, then you get told I have no regional preference. So this middle ground actually is, again, one of the things that we could talk about more, because this is, I think, where some of the strategy and at least stress to me as a career advisor comes in, because I know if I don't see no regional preference and I don't see preference, that they didn't signal me. They must have signaled some other areas, but not ours. So how is that going to be handled? How am I advising our students, and how are programs actually going to utilize that? So I think that's one of the big questions that we have to consider. So in last year, over 60% of applicants did indicate at least one preference. Most of those aligned with where they lived. So either where their home was or where their medical school was, but 33% indicated no geographic preference. And then about 50% of applicants and advisors thought that the geographic preference information may help applicants be noticed by programs that they have more interest in. And over 85% of program directors reported using geographic preferences as part of their holistic decision and or as a tiebreaker when deciding who to interview. And that was the intention. That's from the AAMC, is hopefully driving people more towards holistic reviews and using it, if all things are equal, using these aspects perhaps to help programs identify students who are a good fit. And then about 60% of programs reported that geographic preference information did identify applicants that they may otherwise have overlooked. And so again, I think that that's one of the key reasons why the AAMC has decided to move forward, and why so many programs have decided to get on board, is that there is at least some indication that this will help identify people who are interested and who likely will, who have a higher likelihood of coming to the program, and so hopefully help the process. And then the last part, the third part of the supplemental application, is the signaling. And so this allows students to actually share their interest in a program, in individual programs. Again, this is designed, both the geographic preferencing and the signaling is designed for even before you apply. So it's not to be used for ranking. It is used to be in the initial review process. And so the signals, applicants had an opportunity to send signals to participating programs. They were given a list of which programs were participating and which weren't, so that they didn't waste one of their signals on a program that was not participating. Each of the specialties chooses how many signals, and I apologize, I don't remember exactly. I think it was between 3 and 4 for derm, surgery, and internal medicine. And at least last year, applicants were told not to signal programs that they attended or that they did an away rotation, like not to waste a signal on their home institution. That is another one of the changes for this coming year. And programs only saw if they received a signal from the applicant. And they were clear about the code of contact, as I kind of have alluded to already. Programs should not disclose the identification of applicants who did signal. They should not ask interviewees where they have signaled, and they should not disclose the number of signals that they received. And it was only to be used in that interview offer phase. And so out of the pilot, they found that almost all of the applicants used their maximum number of signals. And most of them were in the same geographic division as their permanent address. We do have to keep in mind that this was during COVID, which may have impacted. This also occurred at the same time as all virtual interviews and things like that. So that may have impacted some of those statistics. And then this is also an important data point, that these signals were not equally distributed across programs. I don't think that's a huge surprise, but about a quarter of programs in each specialty received 50% of the signals. And so the implication for that is that the signals may have different value at different programs, and that may fall down to like a large program versus a small program. I certainly have talked to program directors at small programs who have said we most likely will interview anyone who signals us, but obviously large programs will not be able to do that, or very competitive programs won't. So that gets into, again, one of my areas of angst as a career advisor as to how to help students think through this process and how to make the most of the signals that they use. We don't have any real answers, but hopefully we can wrestle with that together. And then more than 50% of the programs thought that this signaling did help applicants get noticed and trigger more of a holistic review. The top factors that applicants considered when they were signaling were the strengths of the program, the geographic preference, the strength of the training. And then program directors did see value, as I mentioned, it triggering a holistic approach to and using it as a tiebreaker. And again, similar to the geographic preferences, allowed them to identify applicants that they may have otherwise overlooked. This was somewhat of an unexpected outcome, though, which they thought that students were going to just be able to do this and whip out a supplemental application quite quickly. But when they surveyed students, a lot of them spent many hours working on this. And that is obviously on top of their primary ERAS application. So that is one of the potential downsides. And then this came out of some more of the surveys of the applicants as well as the career advisors. So 50% of the applicants did say that they talked to their advisors, the program directors, faculty mentors, and or engaged in social media to figure out what to do with the supplemental application. And people found those helpful. Most people use the AAMC, which is where I'm going to drive lots of people to go because they do have lots of resources available. Only about a third of advisors felt confident advising applicants about how to do this. And so hence another reason why we wanted to share this with this group. And hopefully nationally, this is happening in each of the different specialties as well. The top 3 questions from students were, again, not surprising, strategies on how to use their signals, how our program's going to use the application, and how to use the geographic preferencing. That's the major questions. So moving on to year 2, which is what we are about to embark on very soon. This is the timeline. So my understanding, and this, gosh, I think this is not a PEDS thing, but I could be wrong. I think programs have until July 1st to state whether or not they are going to participate so that they can get all of that together so that applicants know which programs are participating. And then, as you can see, the supplemental application opens August 1st. And one really important piece of this is the supplemental app is due before the rest of the application and before everything else is released. So as you can see here, the supplemental application is due on the 16th of September, and the rest is due on September 28th. So we have to make sure our students are aware of that. These are the participating specialties. And as you can see, so it's 16 different specialties have decided Not everyone is participating in all aspects. So there are a few specialties that chose just to do signaling and not use the other aspects of the supplemental app. But all of the other ones listed here are using the whole, all three elements. And if students are applying in multiple specialties, they can participate in, they will have more tokens, like they can use the tokens in each one of them so that they don't have to divvy them up amongst the two or three programs that they're, the specialties that they are applying to. If they're applying to more than one specialty, they can use the tokens from each. There are a couple changes from what I described from the original pilot. In response to program directors talking about how the meaningful experiences didn't necessarily add that much to the information that they were seeing in the primary application, they actually revamped the meaningful experience a little bit. So it still allows students to tag up to five meaningful experiences, as well as an impactful experience too, if they have any. But they actually also are adding this qualitative piece to it. So in addition to being able to give 300 character explanations, they also can tag their meaningful experiences with a focus and a characteristic. So we'll see if this is a good or bad thing. I don't know. Again, this is another aspect that is going to complicate matters for, I believe, for students and career advisors and student affairs as we try to figure out how to work this. But it allows someone to really think strategically about their application and make sure that they are emphasizing what they want and really utilizing the full application, both the primary and the supplemental, to let the programs know who they are, what's important to them, what are these key areas of focus. So you can see here how they can tag it. And this came from the most recent webinar that I attended from the AAMC to give a visual of how this might work, where a student can really think about, okay, I'm going to pick different experiences and then tag different aspects of it, and then use the 300 character mini essay to elaborate maybe more on why they chose that characteristic or that key area, why that makes it more impactful or more meaningful. And then the geographic preferences, this is where I have it typed out by state. So you can kind of see here that the different areas of the country. And students can, it's the same as last year, can pick up to 3 areas or say, I do not have a preference. And they also can state a preference of setting, whether they have a preference of rural or urban, and give a little bit of an essay there. And then just again, because when I've presented on this before, it gets confusing, at least to me, as to what will programs see depending upon what students select. And so I kind of just spelled out different possibilities here. So if a student indicates a preference for a division and preference for that division and the essay is shared only with programs in that division, it is not shared with programs outside. However, if a student indicates that they do not have a division preference, then that and the essay is shared with all programs. And then if they don't respond, then no information is shared with anyone. And then for the urban and rural, if they indicate that, then that goes out to all programs with the essay. And this is really small, so I apologize, but I knew people would have questions about how many signals each specialty has chosen. And honestly, I don't know what went into their decisions. over because it's all across the board. So each specialty, I think, had a slightly different rationale for how they chose them. So I can elaborate a little bit because I've heard the OBGYN folks talk about it. They are very unique in that they have gold and silver signals. So they didn't think it was complicated enough just to do all of this. They have different color signals where the gold, they only have 3, and those are their highest interest. And then they have 15 silver signals, which are a way to show the other group that they're interested. And then orthopedics decided to do 30 signals, I believe, hoping that then they would signal those top ones and maybe not apply to as many. It'll be interesting to see how this all pans out. And then one other really, I think, key thing that at least I know we talked about on PEDS was, as I mentioned last year in the pilot, students were told not to waste a signal on their home institution or a program that they did an away rotation at. And this year, as you can see, most of the specialties are saying that, in fact, you should signal the program, even if it's your home institution or where you did an away rotation. And then they did allow some of us to put in these little caveats. And so, for example, it came up that a lot of programs, I don't know if this happens across the different specialties, but at least for pediatrics, we here give interviews to all of our students who apply. And so if we know that, should the students have to waste a signal on us? So they allowed us to say, yes, you should signal your own program, your home institution, unless told otherwise. So I assume each of the radiology and psychiatry are functioning similarly. But this is an important thing as you advise your students, depending upon which specialty you're in, for signaling whether if University of Colorado is top in their list, then they might have to use one of their signals here. So then next steps, just to kind of think about some of the benefits that we hope to come out of this. We hope that this will allow students to highlight the most important and impactful experiences, and hopefully be able to have applicants be noticed by programs that may have overlooked them in the past. And then also hopefully drive programs more to a holistic process, so that maybe the folks that do say that they have a geographic preference or a signal, maybe it does warrant at least another look, not a guaranteed interview spot, but at least another look. Some of the potential issues I think I've alluded to as I've gone, and I'm sure you've thought about some along the way. It does increase the time required for students to prepare the materials, for advisors, career advisors and student affairs to advise students on how to do this, and for programs to review. And it still may be redundant to the standard application. There's some concern about how the geographic preferencing and the signaling may be misunderstood, and people may not know how to use that properly. And I know that while this may not ever happen, I think there's a little bit of a feeling of distrust on the student end to say, how do I know that this will not be used against me when you're ranking me? Is there any chance that you would go back and look and see, did you signal or not, and use that as in the rank process, which is a total no-no, but is there a potential for that happening? And then again, as I started off, a lot of uncertainty on how this is all going to work. So I tried to think about implications for the different folks involved in the process. So just some absolutes and also some questions. So for the residency programs, the good news is that you all are going to be able to review all of this in the program director workstation, in contrast to last year where it was a separate system. And hopefully programs will be able to use these the experiences to understand applicants' interests and how they align with your program goals, and perhaps use those tags and the characteristics to be able to build a well-rounded cohort. But then the major questions: how are you going to make sure that the preferences and the signals are only used in the initial process? You do have to think about, are you going to have your students signal your home institution or not? And then for folks who are for students, career advisors, student affairs, I think that we are going to have to think about this more strategically, as I mentioned, to think about, okay, I'm going to write my personal statement about this, and I'm going to use my 5 meaningful experiences to think about these items in my history or past. And then I'm going to, do I have an impactful experience that I want to highlight? Do I want to highlight, do I want to say that I have a geographic preference or not? And really think strategically about that. And so that's going to fall obviously on the student, but then as advisors, we are going to have to be able to help them think through that. And one really important thing that I've heard a lot from the programs that went through this is making sure that they highlight why a particular experience is meaningful. Use those 300 words or 300 characters, sorry, to the maximum benefit. And then, as I mentioned, lots of questions. Should students signal both safety and reach programs? And or not, like, I don't know. And then recognizing that signaling a program does not guarantee an interview. And then one thing that we have started to think about, I know at least in pediatrics is, and I'm sure more globally, is what are the DEI considerations for this process? Is that impactful experience going to be used to perhaps help students who have had other challenges that they had to overcome, or how is that going to be used? And are there ways that this supplemental application might introduce bias? That was not at least analyzed that I am aware of with the pilot. So then I just wanted to end with resources. Since this will be available, as well as if you want my slides, I'm not going to go into detail, but I just wanted to show some of the resources. As I mentioned, the AAMC is key. They have webinars that are available that you can listen to at normal speed or fast speed if you would like. They have this application guide for students is quite helpful. And there's a whole website on the supplemental application with FAQs and all of that. So I would absolutely steer people in that direction. And then again, I'm sorry to have so much of a pediatric focus, but this is what I know. And so, but I assume that your other specialties have a lot of this same stuff going on. And so I would encourage you to reach out if you haven't already to find out what's available. So just so you know, these are all the PEDS education groups. And we work together in the the task force that I am a part of to put together like a multi-page recommendation for this whole recruitment process that includes how to handle a lot of these things. Our PEDS clerkship and medical student organization, COMCEP, we have had webinars, and we're going to have a Q&A next week or 2 weeks. We put together this this summary of the whole process. I branched into, because Megan Treats inspired me to do an infographic, so put together an infographic that's sent out to everyone. And then the students are incredibly mobilized. So I know within PEDS, we have student groups that are tweeting and have stuff on Instagram, and they're holding their own webinars on this whole process. And so then I just wanted to end that the goal is that hopefully we have happy students that are successfully matching in their programs. This, as I'm aging myself, so here, including the hairstyle, my husband's especially. But this is match day. I spent my whole case conference this morning going through my old pictures. But I was able to find, it does say National Resident Matching Program there, where I was very happy to match here. So our hope is that we make this a positive experience for our students and for programs throughout this upcoming application year. So obviously could not resist ending with that slide, but I'm now happy to consider any discussion, questions, comments, review anything, because I know that's a lot of material to go through.
Great, thanks so much, Jenny. I think before we had a few questions, and I wanted to call out that Jeff Druck is here from the Office of Student Life, who's overseeing our subspecialty advisor program with a newly, the vice chairs know this, that we're reinvigorating the curriculum for the vice chairs of education. There were a couple of questions that popped in the chat, and I think most of them so far have been answered. One of the more like theoretical questions I have is the bigger picture of, is this a good, like, is this a good thing? And did pediatrics consider not doing this? And I know you were part of those discussions. Was there consideration not to do it because others, and maybe Jeff has a different opinion about this, may feel differently, but from the student side of things, this has been very stressful.
Yes. Pediatrics spent many hours, like our monthly calls, and it has representatives, program directors, clerkship directors, all of that leadership, at all those levels. We spent many hours deliberating this. They did surveys within pediatrics of program directors. And that ultimately, I would say, is probably what led pediatrics to decide to go in, is that they surveyed pediatric program directors. And it was somewhere like 80% of program directors said they thought that it would be helpful to have this information. And so that was, I think, what mostly pushed people to saying yes. And I think the data that at least there's nothing to suggest harm, like major harm being caused by this. So if there's a chance that it may benefit students and potentially programs, I think that was the ultimate decision. I would be curious. I don't know about the specialties that chose not to do it, because it was, my understanding is it was open to everyone. So I don't know how what was taken into account for the specialties that didn't. I will say, I hope I'm not speaking out of place because this hasn't been announced, but once pediatrics decided to opt in, then each program had to decide if they were going to opt in. And at least, as I mentioned, July 1st, I think, is the deadline. And at least based on the report that I saw this week, it was like, there's like 4 programs that decided not to do it. So like the huge majority of PEDS programs decided to do that. That may have been more peer pressure, yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, just real briefly. I mean, if you look at the supplemental application, as the goal is to have more residency programs look at more applicants, it's been definitely successful from that perspective, in terms of they are looking at a larger swath of students in terms of who it is that they're interviewing. So I think from that perspective, it actually has been proven to be helpful from that perspective. I think the problem is that it's an added stressor for students. And I can't tell you the number of students who have contacted me trying to figure out how to game the system. Yeah. And, I do think that when you add in all these different things for different specialties, I mean, let's be honest, if you have 30 signals for ortho, what that really means to me is that if you're applying in ortho and you don't signal a program, they're not going to interview you. They're not even going to look at your application. So essentially they're using it as a method of limiting the number of applications.
Yes. And I was on one of the webinars, the ortho. Yes, that is essentially what they said. Yep.
Yeah, I think the problem is that since they haven't said that explicitly to students,
yeah.
I mean, our advice to our students is that with the first year of this, we can't tell our students only apply to 30 programs, which honestly, which I think would be a much better solution, is to limit our applications.
Yes.
And until they do that, until they say explicitly, this is, we're only looking at people that signal us, then it doesn't make a difference. I do think it's interesting, and Jenny, I don't know if you wanted to touch on this, but signals specifically were used by urology for the past 2 years.
Correct. Mhm.
And we have good data on that. And essentially what the data showed from the urology programs, if you look sort of in depth and sort of, parsed it out, was that programs that were sort of top tier programs actually ended up using signals only when they were trying to decide between two students that were identical after the interview. So not even before the interview.
Oh,
Yeah. For mid-tier programs, they use signals to decide between two students who are identical in terms of whether or not they wanted to interview them. And lower tier programs interviewed everyone that sent them a signal. So, I think that part of that is also knowing what kind of student you have when you're advising them. And so this really isn't a one size fits all kind of image. It really has to be the kind of thing that you individualize your advice to every student. And unfortunately, that's the same thing for geographic preferences. That's the same thing for rural versus urban. I will say that experiences, it seemed like from the data that the AAMC presented, didn't really make much of a difference. So I don't know if that's going to make a huge difference again this year. There was a question in the chat about whether or not people should try and not overlap. My personal recommendation is that they just go ahead and overlap, because you want people to see that experience in all different phases.
Yeah.
And honestly, although everyone says that they do holistic review, I think the question is how holistic do they do it? If you look at different specialties, there have been some studies that have talked about how long people spend on an application. The most time that anyone spends on an application is still like 20 something minutes. With that being said, they're probably not reading every single element of someone's application regardless. So you want to try and get those big experiences across however you possibly can. So I would say still duplicate it.
Miriam has a comment in the chat too about whether or not this is going to go to all specialties in the future. And I know Vaughn is on here as well from pathology. I would guess that many more programs are going to come on board, but that specialties that have smaller numbers of applicants that they feel is manageable are going to likely continue to do it the way they're doing it. But programs that have thousands of applications that feel like they need something to narrow this down may not, may stick with this supplemental.
what I also heard was that the AAMC, again, because they haven't updated their application since 1996, I believe, again, I hope I'm not speaking out of place, but the sense I got was eventually these questions will just become, like, once they're vetted a little bit, they will just become like the meaningful experience
They'll be the new
will be the new application. So that's kind of exciting to think about, that we're kind of contributing to that piece.
Yeah, and then Josh has a question in the chat too about whether or not we'll be able to hide the signaling in ARIS so that when interviewers are looking at it, they can say, I'm going to take that bias away right now.
I believe so, because that, as you could probably tell, I brought it up several times and is one of the concerns. When we've asked the folks at the AAMC, you cannot filter on the meaningful experiences, but you can filter on the signaling and the geographic preferencing. So you can filter based on that. And so only certain people can see certain areas. So what they, I think, had suggested is to have, for example, like the coordinators can filter so that whoever needs it at the beginning can look at it, but then it's not viewed later on. But those are the things, as I said, that I hope will be worked out at each individual program to make sure that we're handling it and upholding the code of conduct.
Great. Thanks so much again, Jenny. Riley just put in, and thank you, Riley, for helping us with all our Zooms and surveys and everything. Put a link to a survey about the talk in the chat. I think there's going to be more discussion around this. My hope is that the subspecialty advisors curriculum that's rolling out will include ways for us to standardize so that at least at CU, our faculty in per department are giving the same advice to students overall. I think they get really confused and sometimes shop around for the answer that they want about how that should go. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate you being here today. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, my pleasure.